Sasha was furious. She had just figured something out. And now she was fed up with the guys blocking her way. "Get out of my way," she yelled, clenching her fists. "Move it, or else." One of the men sneered at her. "Or else what, lady? You gonna pay their way for them?" He thought he was really funny. But Sasha wasn't laughing. The problem was, in this part of town, there were rules to follow. It was like a big game. And one of the rules was, that you couldn't hurt anyone, or make them do something they didn't want to do. This rule was called the anti-crime code. And it was always on. So even though Sasha was really mad, she couldn't just push the guys out of her way. Imagine you're playing your favorite game with friends, but some players are being super mean. They're using tricks to trap others, and won't let them move. There's something called a block formation, where they squeeze players into a tiny space. Or they might use the box trick, where they surround their victims on all sides. But here's the thing, these sneaky moves only work when everyone is on the ground. Asuna turned to Kirito with a grin. "You ready for this?" she asked. Kirito nodded, his eyes sparkling with excitement. They nodded at each other. And then whoosh! They jumped super high into the air. Their powerful legs and agility sent them soaring over the shocked faces of Sasha and the soldiers. They sailed into an empty lot that was blocked off from the rest of the street. The men were totally caught off guard. "What the M?" some of them shouted, leaping backward in surprise. But Asuna and Kirito weren't worried about them. They had spotted 3 kids trapped in a corner of the alley. 2 boys and 1 girl, all around 13 years old, were huddled together, looking scared. Asuna smiled calmly at the scared kids. "It's okay now," she said gently. "Put your gear back on." The kids' eyes were wide with fear. But they nodded and quickly grabbed their armor. They started fiddling with the menus on their screens. Just then one of the soldiers yelled, "Hey, no no no." He had finally snapped out of his daze, and was trying to take charge again. Asuna and the kids were already in their underwear, having taken off their equipment earlier. "Hey, who do you think you are?" one of the soldiers shouted. "You're getting in the way of army business." Just then, a tall guy in super heavy armor stepped forward. He looked like the boss. "Let me take care of this," he said. His eyes were narrow and mean-looking, which made him seem even scarier. "Do you know who we are?" he asked. "We're the Aincrad Liberation Force. You're not gonna want to mess with us. Why don't we take this conversation somewhere else? Like our headquarters." He said it like it was an invitation, but it didn't sound very friendly. He pulled out a huge sword from his belt, and walked towards them with a relaxed stride. As he moved, he smacked the flat side of the blade against his hand. The sun's rays caught the sword's edge, making it gleam. His armor also shone, but in a dull way that showed it had never been scratched or fixed. "Want to take this outside and settle it for real?" he asked with a challenge. Asuna's eyes blazed with anger. She had wanted to handle things calmly, but when she saw the scared kids, her frustration boiled over. "Kirito, can you hold you for a sec?" she asked. Kirito took the sleeping girl from Asuna and tossed her rapier back to her. She caught it, and pulled it out of its holder. Then, she marched right up to the leader of the group. The man's face went totally blank. His mouth dropped open and he stumbled over his words. He stuttered. Asuna was furious. And she wasn't backing down. Asuna charged forward, her fist flying at top speed right at the guy's surprised face. Suddenly purple lights burst out, and a powerful shock wave exploded. The man's ugly mug snapped back, and he landed on his butt, eyes wide with shock. "If you want to fight, we don't need to go outside the city," Asuna said, her voice firm. She took another step closer, and then Daosum. Her right arm flashed out again, ready to strike. Boom! Another blast shook the air. The leader flew backward, but Asuna just kept on coming. "Don't worry, you're not getting hurt," she said with a calm smile. "That means I can keep this up all day." The leader looked up at her, his lips shaking. He finally figured out what was going on. "You see, inside the city's safe zone there's like an invisible shield that protects players from getting hurt by weapons or other attacks." Asuna knew this and she was using it to her advantage. But there was another catch to that rule. If no damage was done, the system wouldn't flag the attacker as a bad player. Some gamers found a way to take advantage of this loophole with something called zone battle training. As they leveled up and got stronger, the game started to fight back in a cool way. The special code that blocked their attacks began to glow brighter and make louder sounds. Eventually their sword skills even got strong enough to knock their target backward a bit. Imagine being in a tough spot, with no idea what's happening. That's what was going on here. A guy was getting slammed to the ground, and he was totally freaking out. The other soldiers finally snapped out of it, and grabbed their weapons. They came running from both sides of the alley. Realizing something was very wrong, they formed a half circle around Asuna, who looked like she was in a fierce battle mode. Her eyes were flashing with intensity, like they used to when she was totally focused and unstoppable. It was like she was a force to be reckoned with. Asuna charged into battle without warning, her rapier flashing in the light. The quiet alley erupted into chaos, explosions boomed, and people screamed. It was intense. 3 minutes later, Asuna finally stopped fighting and lowered her sword. The alley was empty except for a few stunned soldiers who were lying on the ground. The rest had run away, leaving their leader behind. Asuna let out a deep breath. She put away her sword and turned around. But what she saw made her gasp. Sasha and the kids from the church were standing frozen in shock, staring at her with wide eyes. Asuna took a step back, surprised to see them there. "Oh," she exclaimed, not knowing what to say next. She glanced down, thinking the kids would be scared of her because she was so angry. But instead, a boy with super cool red hair was bouncing up and down like a rubber ball. "Whoa, that was awesome," he exclaimed, his eyes shining like stars. Kirito, the guy holding a little girl named Yukri in one hand and a sword in the other, couldn't help but smile proudly. "I told you she's super strong," he said. Asuna laughed nervously, but the kids didn't seem to care. They all cheered and jumped on her, like she was a rock star or something. The boy with red hair was still grinning from ear to ear. "That was the coolest thing I've ever seen," he repeated. It was clear that these kids thought she was a hero, not someone to be afraid of. Sasha's face lit up with a huge smile, and happy tears filled her eyes. But then, something amazing happened. A tiny voice spoke up, everyone's hearts. Asuna's head jerked up in surprise. She saw that Yui's now awake in Kirito's arms, staring off into space with her right hand stretched out. Asuna looked in the same direction, but she didn't see anything. Yui's voice was barely above a whisper as she said, "Everyone's hearts are one." Kirito's face filled with worry as he asked, "Yui, what's wrong? What's going on?" Yui's eyes fluttered open, and she looked totally confused. Asuna quickly grabbed her hand. "Hey Yui, do you remember anything?" she asked. Yui thought for a moment. Her face scrunched up in concentration. "I wasn't here," she said slowly. "I was somewhere really, really deep." Suddenly Yui's eyes went wide, and she let out a loud, high-pitched scream. Asuna had never heard anything like it before in the game. So it was like a burst of static on the radio, a weird crackling noise that made her jump. Yui's body started shaking really hard, like it might break apart. Asuna yelled, "Why we?" and grabbed the little girl to try and calm her down. Yui wailed, "Mama. I'm scared, Mama." Asuna quickly took Yui from Kirito, and gave her a big hug. After a few seconds, the weird shaking stopped, and Yui's body relaxed. Kirito looked puzzled, and whispered, "What just happened?" The silence in the alley was broken by a loud question. Suddenly chaos erupted in the church's great hall. "Hey Mina, pass me a roll," someone shouted. But before she could respond, another voice piped up, "Watch out or you'll spill everything." The arguments kept coming. "Miss Sasha, Jin took my egg," one kid complained. "But I gave you my carrots," Jin shot back. Asuna and Kirito sat back and enjoyed the crazy scene unfolding before them. They were in Sector E7 of the Town of Beginnings, watching the breakfast battle at the church. It was definitely an event to remember. The room was buzzing. 2 super long tables were packed with tons of food, eggs, sausages and salad galore. About 20 kids were squeezed onto the benches, chowing down like they were starving. Asuna sat at a smaller table with her friends Kirito, Yui and Sasha, watching the chaos with a smile. "This looks like a blast," she thought to herself as she took a sip of tea from her cup. Her friends were enjoying the quiet morning with her, away from the noisy crowd. "It's always this crazy," someone said with a grin, and Asuna nodded in agreement. This was just another normal day. Sasha rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "Telling them to be quiet doesn't work," she said with a laugh. But as she watched the kids chow down, Her face lit up with a warm smile. Asuna noticed and asked, "You really love kids, don't you?" Sasha's cheeks turned pink as she grinned. "Yeah, I do," she admitted. "I was actually studying to be an elementary school teacher, back in the real world. You know how crazy some classrooms used to get. I wanted to help make them better. I was super excited to be a role model for kids. But when I got here and started living with them, things didn't exactly go as planned. It's been a real eye-opener. Actually, I think the kids have been helping me out more than I'm helping them. And you know what? That's totally okay." Asuna smiled and nodded in agreement. She gently patted Yui on the back, who was totally focused on trying to get her spoon to her mouth. It was clear that Yui was determined to master this simple task. Asuna felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. This little girl Yui had brought so much joy and warmth into her life. It was a totally different feeling from the nervous excitement she got whenever Kirito was around. With Yui, it was like being wrapped in a cozy blanket, soft, gentle and soothing. And after Yui's scary episode the day before, Asuna was relieved that she had bounced back quickly. Just a few minutes later, Yui was awake and smiling again. Asuna was totally done with traveling after what just happened. She didn't want to walk forever or use those teleport gates. Luckily, Sasha suggested they crash in an empty room at the church for the night. The next morning, Yu was feeling much better, which was a huge relief for Asuna and Kirito. But even though Yu was okay, their big problem still hadn't gone away. Yui's memories were coming back, but they were still missing some big pieces. She didn't remember ever visiting the town of beginnings, and it seemed like she never had a guardian to take care of her. That meant Asuna and Yui still had no idea what caused Yui's memory loss, and why she was acting so young again. They were back to square one with no leads to follow. But Asuna was sure about one thing: she would stick by Yui's side until her memories came back. Even when they had to go back to fighting on the front lines, Asuna would find a way to make it work. She gently stroked Yui's hair, lost in thought. Kirito set his cup down and turned to Sasha. "Hey, can I ask you something?" he said. "What's going on with those soldiers? I used to think the army was all about keeping people safe. But the guys we met yesterday seemed more like bullies." Sasha's expression turned serious. "Things started to change about 6 months ago," she explained. "Some of the soldiers began taking money from people and calling it taxes. It was like they thought they could just take whatever they wanted. Others tried to stop them, but it's been a big mess ever since. I've seen some crazy things, even army soldiers getting into fights over something. There are rumors that the leaders don't always agree on everything. That's not surprising, I thought. The organization is huge, with over 1,000 members. You can't expect everyone to be on the same page all the time. But if what happened yesterday is normal, we need to do something about it. We can't just ignore it." Asuna asked, "What?" Kirito's voice was full of disgust when he said he. Asuna had to hold back a laugh at how obvious Kirito's dislike was. "I think he probably does know," she said with a grin. "Heathcliff seems to keep an eye on what the army is up to. But here's the weird thing. He only cares about one thing: how far along the best players are in the game. For months, he's been asking me questions about you, Kirito. But when we took down Laughing Coffin, that bad guild, he just said it was our decision, and left it alone. So I don't think he'll try to gather a group to boss the army around." "Yeah, that sounds like him," Kirito said with a shrug. "But it also means there's only so much we can do about this problem." Kirito leaned in to take a sip of his tea. His eyebrows scrunched up in thought. Suddenly he looked up and glanced at the church entrance. "Wait, someone's coming." "Only one person is coming," someone said. Sasha replied. "Oh, another guest, I guess." Just then there was a knock at the door. The sound echoed through the room. Sasha grabbed her dagger and strapped it to her waist. Kirito followed close behind, just in case something went wrong. A moment later they came back with a really tall woman. Her super long silver hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and her bright blue eyes sparkled like the sky on a sunny day. Her face was sharp and slender, making those amazing eyes really stand out. Asuna was super smart, and it showed. In the virtual world of SAO, players could change their hairstyle and eye color to whatever they liked. But most players had faces that looked Japanese, so it was hard to pull off really bold colors. Asuna even tried having bright pink hair for a little while, but it didn't quite work out. She ended up feeling embarrassed and switching back to her normal brown hair. Asuna never told anyone about that awful experiment again. But then, something caught her eye. A mysterious visitor walked in, and Asuna couldn't help but stare. The woman was super elegant and beautiful. However, as Asuna took a closer look, she started to feel uneasy. That's when she noticed the woman's armor peeking out from under her gray cape. The armor was a dead giveaway. It was the uniform of the army. Asuna saw a green tunic and pants underneath, with shiny steel pieces that didn't sparkle too much. It all seemed pretty cool. But Asuna's excitement quickly turned to tension. Who was this woman, and what did she want? Sasha walked into the room with some pretty cool and kinda scary gear strapped to her hips. On one side she had a short sword, and on the other, a black leather whip that was coiled up like a snake. The kid stopped talking and stared at her, looking a little worried. But Sasha just smiled and said, "Hey, it's okay. Keep eating your breakfast." Even though Sasha didn't exactly look like the most responsible person, the kids totally trusted her. They knew she had their backs no matter what. The group went back to munching away and making lots of noise as they ate. Sasha walked over to a small table with the woman and said, "Hey, have a seat." The woman bowed politely and sat down. Asuna looked confused and raised an eyebrow at Kirito. "What's going on?" she seemed to be asking. Kirito smiled and sat back down, explaining, "This is Uriel." Uriel, a woman with shiny silver hair, turned to Asuna and bowed. "Nice to meet you," she said with a smile. "I'm Uriel, and I'm part of a group called the A-Elf." Asuna's eyes widened. She had never heard of that before. "Elf?" she asked. Uriel nodded. "It stands for Incrad Liberation Force. It's a bit of a mouthful, so we just use the shortcut." Her voice was smooth and calm, like honey. Asuna felt a pang of jealousy. She had always wished she had a stronger voice. Not one that sounded so high-pitched and kid-like. "It's nice to meet you too," she said with a smile. "I'm Asuna from the Knights of the Blood Group. Right now I'm taking a break from my duties." She gestured to her friend who was busy slurping down the last bits of soup. "And this is Yui. She's really enjoying her snack." Yui was now sipping on some fruit juice, taking her sweet time and savoring every drop. She glanced up at the new person and focused on them. She tilted her head to the side, then broke into a smile before going back to what she was doing. But when she heard the name of their group, Uriel's eyes went super wide. "The Knights of the Blood Oath. No wonder you took down those guys so easily," she said. As soon as ears perked up at this, she realized Uriel was talking about the thugs they had dealt with the day before. Asuna started to feel defensive again, wondering if Uriel was there to cause trouble. "So are you here to complain about what we did?" she asked, her voice a bit sharper than before. But Uriel quickly replied, "No, not at all. Actually, I want to thank you," Uriel said with a smile. Asuna and Kirito looked at each other in surprise, unsure what to say. They just sat there in silence. Then, Uriel stood up straight and got formal. "I have a special request for both of you," she said. Asuna and Kirito exchanged curious glances. "A request?" Asuna repeated. Uriel nodded, her shiny silver hair moving with emotion. "Yes, that's right. Let me explain something. The army hasn't always been called that. In fact, it wasn't officially known as the ALF until a guy named Kadokawa took charge. He used to be a sub-leader of our guild." "Hey, do you remember our old guild name?" someone asked. "We used to be called the MTD Guild." Asuna shook her head. She hadn't heard of it before. But Kirito jumped in right away. "MTD stands for MMO Today," he explained. "It was this super popular website in Japan all about online games." He thought for a moment, then added, "The guy who ran the site started our guild." Just as Kirito was about to say more, Uriel spoke up. Her voice was soft, but her face turned pale when she said, "His name is Thinker." Imagine a world where everyone works together and shares what they have. That's what the founder of the army wanted to create, a team where everyone gets an equal share of food, information, and other important resources. He didn't want to build a strict rule-bound organization like the army is today. Asuna had heard the stories about how the army was supposed to work. The idea sounded awesome. Players would join forces to battle monsters, earn a steady income, and then split the money fairly among themselves. It was a great concept, but as Asuna knew, things didn't quite turn out that way. The army's ideals eventually fell apart, and now it's a very different story. Think about it, even in super immersive online games like MMORPGs, there's always a behind-the-scenes battle going on. It's all about who gets to use the computer's resources, like memory and processing power. The game Sword Art Online SEO took this idea to the extreme by trapping players in a virtual world. But that didn't change the fact that it's still a fight for system resources. To really make the most of this idea, a group like a guild needs to be just the right size and have strong leaders. If it gets too big, things can get out of hand. Things started to get out of hand. Players were getting kicked out and others were fighting back. The leader of the guild was losing control fast. That's when Kibo showed up. Uriel said, her voice filled with sadness. He saw an opportunity to take charge. Because Thinker wasn't paying close enough attention, Kibo started gathering a team of officers who thought like he did. And they wanted to make the guild stronger. But in their own way. That's when our guild got a major makeover. We became the Aincrad Liberation Force. Our first big move was to start taking down the bad guys and claiming the best spots in the wilderness as our own. For a while we'd been playing it cool with other guilds and following the rules of the game. But now that we had a lot of members, we could take charge of certain areas for as long as we wanted. This meant we could earn way more rewards and boost our wealth big time. Things just got worse for the town. Kiba's group is now super powerful. Thinker, who used to be in charge, is basically just a symbol now. Kiba's followers are getting out of control and taking advantage of people in the town. They're acting like they own the place, demanding money from others, and calling it a tax. Those guys you stopped yesterday were some of Kiba's minions. Uriel took a break to sip some tea that Sasha had made. But Kibo's group had a big problem too. They were so busy collecting stuff that they forgot about the rest of the game. It was like they were trying to build a house without a plan. Our guild members started to notice that this strategy wasn't going to work. And they weren't afraid to speak up. Kibo got worried that his group would turn against him, so he made a crazy move to calm everyone down. Imagine being part of an epic gaming guild. Kirito was about to take on a massive challenge. He gathered a team of the guild's top players, around a dozen of them, and sent them to battle the newest boss. Asuna couldn't help sneaking a peek at Kirito, remembering their past struggles. Who could forget the disastrous fight against Korvats and his team's failed attempt to beat Gleam Yes, the super tough boss on the 74th floor. Even the best players in the guild knew they weren't as skilled as Kirito and his fellow advanced clearers. Here's what happened. Our group got beat. Our captain was killed, and Kiba got in huge trouble for making a really bad decision. We might have been able to kick him out of the guild, but things didn't go that way. Uriel scrunched up her nose and bit her lip, thinking about it. 3 days ago, she said, Kiba was in a tight spot, and he set a trap for Thinker. Imagine being trapped deep inside a super tough dungeon with no way out. That's exactly what happened to Thinker. He walked into a trick set up by someone clever who used a special crystal to transport him to the deepest part of the dungeon. Thinker didn't even bring any weapons because he thought he was just going to have a chat with Kibo. But now he's stuck and can't fight his way out. He doesn't even have a teleport crystal to help him escape. It's been 3 days ago, Thinker thought, realizing how much time had passed since he got trapped. Then what about him? Asuna asked quickly. Uriel nodded slightly. His name isn't on the Monument of Life, so we think he made it to a safe place, she explained. But here's the thing, it's a really tough dungeon, and he can't escape on his own. Asuna knew that once you're inside a dungeon, you're cut off from the outside world, you can't get messages, or access the guild's storage room, and there's no way to send him a special crystal that would let him teleport out. Uriel was worried because Thinker probably knew about a trick called Portal Peking. It's when someone sets up a portal that leads straight into danger, and it's basically a sneaky way to get someone killed.